big hello to you. It is great to see you. I hope I find you well. You're staying safe. Happy modelling, of course. And welcome back up here to the loft on Weir Yard with me, Jennifer Kirk. And today we're going to be taking a look at some of your requests in an earlier video for what I should be considering to do next. And I did that liveries video on the South Eastern and Chatham Railway, ready to run liveries, what was available. And a lot of you put in some suggestions in the comments as to which liveries video I should do next. I enjoyed hearing from you all, but the one which came up time and time again at the top of the list was London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. So I thought I would delve in today to see what ready-to-run models I've got from the London, Brighton and South Coast. So without further ado, don't forget to tickle that like button and also share us on social media so everybody else can enjoy what ready-to-run delights I have found in London, Brighton and South Coast Railway livery. I had some really great suggestions from some of you, and I'd like to thank you all for making those suggestions at the end of the South Eastern and Chatham Railway liveries video that outlined what ready-to-run locomotives there were available in the livery of that company. One of the answers that I kept getting to my question of what you'd like to see next was London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. So I have turned to my collection and looked through all of those to see just what I've got that represents the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. I don't have a complete collection of every locomotive I know that's been released ready to run, but it's certainly a great representation of them. The first up is the Brighton H1 Atlantic. This is a model from Bachmann and one that we did review on this channel, and it subsequently became one of my favourite locomotives. It has consistently appeared in my top 5 favourite locomotive lists, usually in the number 1 slot, and this is number 39, La France. In this livery, she was named to commemorate hauling the French leader's train into London, and it really was an amazing and striking livery from Bachmann when she turned up. She wasn't the first locomotive that Bachmann released in this livery, but certainly for me, it was the most eye-catching and the first time I'd seen a tender locomotive in London, Brighton and South Coast Railway livery. The chocolate brown is really set off by that brass-coloured lining, and it's just a fabulous model with that ornate crest on the splasher, and everything else about this locomotive just oozes pre-grouping charm. At the time of her release, she was the only H1 Atlantic that Bachmann announced in a tranche of what were otherwise all H2 Atlantics, and that of course suggested that more was to come from Bachmann. And well, it certainly did. Eventually we did get the H2 Atlantic in the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway livery, here as number 422. There are a number of detail differences on this model from the H1 Atlantic that match those that the prototypes carried. The H2 was of course a development from the H1, so it was understandable that they incorporated a few of the details that they learnt through experience from this particular version of the locomotive. They were sterling performers, and some of these did last right through into British Rail days, and Beachy Head was the final locomotive to be withdrawn from British Rail, sadly missing out on preservation simply through lack of funds, as the Bluebell Railway did desperately want to buy her, and indeed for a time she was set aside so that they could raise the money, but time was not on their side, and eventually BR scrapped her as the money could not be found. The next locomotive, we go down to the E4 tank. Now, Bachmann produced two versions of this. One, as per the preserved example, now living at the Bluebell Railway as Birch Grove, was released as a collector's club item and did sell out incredibly fast. I'm guessing that spurred on by that, Bachmann released number 579 in this slightly plainer livery, and actually this was the first time that I saw a pre-grouping livery locomotive, tooled up to modern standards, linger on the shelves. She came off the back of the C-Class that had been amazingly successful, selling out and commanding incredibly high prices. So I'm guessing it was a little bit of a surprise for all round that number 579 lingered as a shelf queen. And actually at one point I saw some of the retailers such as Hatton's actually selling her at a discount just to shift stock. It really is a great locomotive and one that I was incredibly pleased to add to my collection. And I paid full retail for her because I bought her the day she came out. And I'm not disappointed at that. Sometimes you just have to do that to get a locomotive that you really, really like. Terriers have been a model that have been a staple of a number of different ranges since they were first introduced by Dapol a very long time ago. These two particular models are two of those that were released later on by Hornby after they bought the moulds. Whitechapel, in fact, is the very last London, Brighton and South Coast Railway liveried old-style terrier that was released. As a Hornby Collectors Club model, along with Sutton in Kent and East Sussex Railway livery, she was actually one that was snapped up at a bargain price at the time of £35. It was actually an incredible price, and little were we to know that the model was soon to be completely retooled from the ground up, and this model would be consigned to history. I did in fact buy Whitechapel, and you can see here next to Wadden, who is 10 years more senior than her in terms of release dates, that the colour on the plastic really didn't quite match. This colour is much better, and you can see that these models really did hold their own for a long time, but compared to the newer models coming through, they really were past their best. A lot of people had been crying out for an all-new tooled terrier, so it was interesting that we got not one but two announced in rapid succession. Hornby retooled theirs, and Dapol, in conjunction with Rails, brought out one of their own. For a while there was a battle of the pedigree terriers, but actually there seems to have been room in the market for both. What there wasn't room for is the older models seen here, and these have now rapidly just disappeared, and any retailer who was unfortunate enough to be left with stock when the Battle of the Terriers happened has found that these are the ultimate shelf queen, lingering on shelves, nobody really wanting them. And the reason why is because those all-new terriers came out at much the same price point. We had a plethora of these in a multitude of different liveries, but in the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway improved engine green, which is actually, as you can see here, a yellow ochre colour, they brought out a huge number of different liveries. I don't have all of them, but I do certainly have a few to show you a sampling of the different terriers that Hornby brought to the market. Leadenhall is one which I'm not aware ever having a previous release from either Dapol or Hornby with the older style tooling. It's certainly an interesting locomotive in that it was one of those that was scrapped even before leaving London, Brighton and South Coast Railway ownership. The first tranche of terrier withdrawals meant that a number of these locomotives, rather than being sold on or renovated, just went to be cut up, and Leadenhall was one of those. So this very much strictly is a pre-grouping model through and through. I bought it because, I suppose just out of curiosity and the fact that I do have quite a love for these terriers. One of the other models that Hornby have released, which again is a somewhat obscure prototype, is Merton. The story behind Merton was simply that Merton is near to the original factory, so it made sense as a special centenary edition. I don't actually have Merton, but it is a locomotive that I wouldn't mind adding to my fleet. Other Terriers that were brought out included Brighton, and this was one of the models that went head-to-head with the Rails Daypole versions, be it that they both brought out exactly the same model in exactly the same livery. This is the Hornby version, and it's one that we did review on this channel, and I was really pleased to get hold of it. It is a lovely model, and despite the fact that a lot has been said between the Hornby and the Rails Daypole Terriers, they are both very credible models, and the market is big enough to support them both. The next Terrier here is from the other camp. This is the Rails Daypole Terrier, and very much this became one of my top 5 favourite models. Sound fitted, this really is a special model. Box Hill, of course, is the locomotive that survived into the National Collection, so it made sense for her to appear in model form. She hasn't competed head-to-head with a Hornby model as yet, so this very much is firmly a Rails Daypole Terrier through and through. In terms of other liveries, Rails and Daypole did bring out a locomotive in this darker brown livery that you see behind with the E4, the H1 and the H2. As Gypsy Hill, she had LB&SCR on her tanks in very much a similar style to what you see on the H2 Atlantic. I don't have a model of this, it certainly sold incredibly quickly, and I'm somewhat surprised that other models have not been released in the same livery, given that we have a glut of the improved engine green models, and she was, as far as I know, the only version of the new tooled models to be released in that LB&SCR livery in the darker brown. A special mention should also be made of Stepney. She's the celebrity terrier that was preserved by the Bluebell Railway, released by Hornby, but as number 655, which was her later renumbered number. She is also available and out there, but given the popularity of this locomotive prototype, she sold out incredibly quickly. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick look at what is available ready to run for London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. There are a lot more Terriers, of course, than those 3 that you see here, but what you see here is a great representation from the 2 different marques that took on this model with a full-spec modern tooled version. The E4 at the back, there is a second version, as I said in this video, as Birch Grove, but you'll find that she sold out very, very quickly and proved a lot more popular than this version that did tend to get put into the bargain remaindered bins for a while, although is now quite sought after. Both the H2 and the H1 have sold incredibly well. The market really was crying out for an iconic London, Brighton and South Coast Railway express tender locomotive, and both of these fit the bill really, really well. Second hand, you will find the older style Terriers from both Daypole and from Hornby, pretty cheap bargain bucket prices, but they are able to be DCC fitted, and I've actually used the chassis quite effectively under some of the replacement 3D printed locomotive bodies that are reaching the market from companies such as Enwins 3D, so there is still life in these models yet. If you're not too bothered about the finesse of the all-new tooled models, you can find these locomotives for a knockdown price in fully functional condition, and just from memory they have been released in pretty much most of the different identities that the real Terriers carried. But if you want a fully modern spec'd DCC ready tooled up examples and with the option of fully fitted sound, then really there is no contest other than to go for the Rails Daypole Terrier or the Hornby retooled version, and these can actually still be picked up for a really, really favourable price. So I hope you've enjoyed this little overview. Don't forget, I'd really love to hear from you in the comments down below just what you thought about the ready-to-run releases. Are there any other glaring examples that I've missed? Or are there any locomotives that the prototypes you feel really should be appearing ready to run? I'd also like to hear what liveries from which railway companies you'd like to see next. Leave all that in the description box down below, and I look forward to reading your comments. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below just what you think I should be doing for the next collection of ready-to-run liveries for a particular railway company. It's always great to hear from you, and I really do look forward to being inspired by your thoughts. What do you think as well about what you've seen today in this video? Have I missed out any glaring, obvious ones that you know about available ready to run? I would really love to hear from you. But without further ado, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying do check out our merch and do consider subscribing to the channel if you've not already done so. But until next time, you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N. from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Graham Foster, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, and Alan Dickerson. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.